Hey guys, we are going to continue Module 7.1 today. Yesterday we took a look at the beginning part of it, and let's take a recap of everything that we learned yesterday. First of all, we learned a couple different things. We learned that an open circle, when you're graphing an inequality, is going to be used for a greater than or less than symbol, and a closed circle, one that's filled in all the way, would be used for a greater than or equal to or a less than or equal to symbol. That's one thing that we learned. We also learned that when you have an inequality, such as 2 plus x is greater than 3, then you know that you could subtract both to get that x by itself, or isolate the x, or isolate the variable. You can subtract that 2, and you are left with x over here is greater than, to the subtraction over here, is greater than 1, and we know that x has to be greater than 1, and you could easily add or subtract numbers to both sides. The one thing that we gave a little preview of yesterday, we could add and we can subtract on both sides of the equation to keep it equal, right? The one thing that we did notice yesterday was we can multiply by a number, right, on both sides of an equation, but when we divided by a number was when we actually had to change the sign to make it true. So we're going to go over that in more detail today, okay? So here's our first example problem. This is in Module 7 as one of the examples. I think it's on page 206 or 207, somewhere in there. They give the full explanation of it. I just wanted to grab a snapshot of this, the problem itself, in order to walk you through it. So looking at this problem, our goal is to do what? Yeah, isolate that y, get it by itself, just like we were doing with our equations for the Module 6 test, right? And so I've got to ask myself, what is happening to that y? Right now it's being divided by 3. So in order to get the y by itself, in order to isolate it, I've got to undo that. Since it's being divided by 3, in order to undo that, I have to multiply by 3. So I'm going to multiply this side by 3. So it's going to be y over 3 times 3, this is a circle, times 3, is greater than or equal to 5 times 3, right? So I can put this over 1, cross cancel, everything's a 1, so I'm left with y over here is greater than or equal to 15, right? And so when I graph that equation, first of all, I can check it. Let's do that. In order to check the equation, or if I can graph the equation, let's graph it first. I want to go that direction, okay? I'm going ahead and I'm going to put in some numbers in here. I'm going to think it through. I need the number 15 in here. Let's put 15 right here. 16 is going to be here, 14 here, and then you have all the other numbers. I'm just going to make a quick one right here. Of course, you can have more numbers in there, but you get the idea, right? And so, am I going to have an open circle or a closed circle? Closed circle, right? So I'm going to put a closed circle at 15 because it has that equal sign in there as well. Closed circle at 15. And now I've got to decide which direction it needs to go. So if y is greater or equal to 15, does 15 work? Yes, that's why we have that closed circle. So 15 works. Does 16 work? Y is greater than 15. So is 16 greater than 15? Yes, 16 works. Let's check the other direction. Does 12 work? 12, is it greater than 15? No. So that means I have to, sorry, that's my dog jumping up next to me. I'm going to make the arrow go in this direction so that it covers the 16. Just like yesterday, you're going to continue that problem. The only difference was this time, in order to isolate that variable, we were going to be multiplying by 3 this time around, okay? For the next problem, looking at this one. What's my goal in here? Yep, I want to isolate that x. I want to get it by itself. So I ask myself the question, what is happening to the x right now? It is being multiplied by -4. So how do I undo that? Yeah, you're right. I'm going to divide by -4. Same thing on the other side. And in order to solve this problem, I'm going to end up with x is greater than 52 divided by 4, and that would be 1, that'd be 12, 13, right? It would be is greater than negative 13. But here's the thing. That's what my answer would typically be, but we discussed this yesterday just a tiny bit. If I try to plug this in and I say, okay, it's got to be greater than negative 13, so let's try negative 10 to check our step. If I did negative 4 times negative 10, which is greater than negative 13 because it's on a number line, negative 13 is down here, and negative 10 would be this direction, and it's these numbers to the right are greater. Do you agree? Okay. To the right, right? Okay. So if I did negative 4 times negative 10, is it greater than 52? I multiply this. 4 times negative 4 times negative 10 equals 40, and it is not greater than negative 52. So this is when we got to the rule. So it's not true. It cannot work this way. So here's where we get the rule. When, write down, you're going to forget this. This is where you're going to make a mistake on the test. When you multiply or divide by a negative number, you have to, with an inequality, right? You must switch the sign. Okay? So, in other words, when I get to this point, since I divide it by a negative, as soon as I divide by that negative, I have to switch the sign in the opposite direction. Okay? So, if I erase all this work in here because that can't be true, and I divide those two, then my work would look like this. I'm going to divide by negative 4. As soon as I divide by that negative number, then I'm going to switch the sign. So I'm left with x is less than, notice that there's a difference in the sign, negative 13. Okay? So when I'm graphing this equation, here's my number line. Let me add a little bit of space in here and change it to green and go a little bit further down. So let's just say this is negative 15 in here. Okay. I know they're not evenly spaced. Let's pretend that they are. That's really important for you when you're like doing the official version of this. Okay. But I've got to ask myself, am I going to have an open circle or a closed circle on negative 13? Yeah, it's going to be open. Okay, because it does not include it. There's no equal sign there. Then I've got to ask myself, okay, what's a number there's some number that's less than negative 13, and that would be any number to the left of negative 13 is less than. Do you agree? And so I would be going in this direction towards the 15. Let me change that color for you. Open circle, going to the left because I want less than. X is going to be less than negative 13. So now we can do our check step, right? I do want you to do this check step every single time. You're going to catch yourself on something going to be really important for you. So my check step over here. Now let's plug in negative 15. Negative 4. Let's replace that x with negative 15 because it's along our number line in here, right? And so 4 times negative 4 times negative 15, is it greater than 52? Okay? Negative 4 times negative 15 equals positive 60 because the negative times the negative equals the positive. And 60, is it greater than 52? Yes, it is. 60 is greater than 52. And so it's correct. So your rule is anytime you multiply or divide, either way, by a negative number, then you have to switch the sign. Okay? Let's move on to the next problem. Let's practice this. You got the problem negative 10y is less than 60. Okay? To isolate that y, you've got to get it by itself. What are you going to do? Divide by negative 10. As soon as you divide by a negative 10 on both sides, what are you going to do? You're right. You're going to flip that sign. So when you write it, you're going to say y. Since I divided by a negative 10, I need to change it, the direction. So now y is going to be greater than 60 divided by negative 10 will be negative 6 because a positive divided by a negative is a negative. If I have my number line here, I'm going to put in a couple numbers in here. Let's put in, let's put my 0 over here. Let's put a negative 5, a negative 6, a -7, and let's put those numbers in there. Open or closed circle? I'm going to want an open circle, you're right, because there's no equal sign there. Open circle, and in this case, the y has to be greater than a -6, and so if anything's greater, it's going to the right, and so I have my arrow going this direction to the right, right? My check step, I'm going to pick any number along that number line. So I can put 0 in there. So I can do my check step, I'm just going to plug in a number that's along this line here. I could do 2 because that's also in there, because this number line goes on forever. It's an infinite in the positive direction, okay, or to the right. So I can put -10 times, let's do 2 because it's in there. It would be like right in here, right? So -10 times 2, is it less than 60? All right. 10 times -2 is -20. Is it less, oops, I'm sorry. Is it less than 60? Yes, it is. And so -20 is less than 60. There we go. We're correct. Okay. Go ahead and do this problem on your own. Pause the video if you need to. And we'll talk in a second. Okay. Take a look at this problem really quick. What is our goal? Yeah, to find t. Okay. Now, we don't want to find -t. We want to find t. So you can think of this negative number, this negative sign, being attached to the 6 if you want to. So you can ask yourself, what is happening to the t? It's being divided by -6. So in order to get that t by itself, you can multiply by a -6. Does that make sense? And if you do that to one side, you have to do it to the other. So I can take 7 times -6. As soon as I do that, I'm going to flip the sign, and I'm going to go flip it because I did multiplication by a negative number. Okay? So I'm going to do 7 times a -6. Sorry about that. Let me just grab that. Is less than or equal to now, since I flipped it, -t over 6, or the t over -6, either way you want to think about it, times -6. Let me move that actually down towards the bottom so that you know I'm thinking of that 6 as the negative so that I can undo it to have t as the positive. Does that make sense to you? Okay. When I do my problem here, 7 times -6, positive times negative is going to be a negative. It's going to equal 42. I now already switched my sign in here. I switched that sign, so I'm going to keep it the way it is now because I already did it. And over here, I do t over -6. These guys cancel out or cross cancel, and I'm left with 1 across here. And so I'm left with just t over here. So I got -42 is less than or equal to t. If I have a number line, let's say that -42 is way down here. Let me do -45. You always give a couple on each side of it. Let's say this is -42, and let's say that this is negative, I'm going to count by 3s here, try and make them equidistant. This is going to be -39. Okay? We'll probably have a number line for you on the test. But I got to think it through. Am I going to have a closed circle or an open circle on 42? You got it. It's going to be a closed circle because of that equal sign. Now I got to ask myself, notice that the t is on the other side. T is going to be greater than -42. And so I want this side to be bigger with the t. That means I'm going to be heading to the right direction because the t has to be greater than it. Anything to the right of it is going to be a viable answer. Okay? I'm going to do my check step. I'm going to do 7 is greater than or equal to any number. Let's do something that's easily divisible by 6. Let's do -36 would be down here. Do you agree? So -36 divided by the -6, right? Because it was still a negative in there. Don't you agree? Yep. And so let's see. 7 is greater than or equal to, and if I do that problem in there, I end up with +6. And so this is true. It is correct. Got it? Don't forget when you do these problems, you've got to go back to the original one and plug that in. Okay? that one can be a little tricky, and you can get lost in positive and negative numbers. So make sure you take your... This next part can be really tricky. I want you to pay really close attention. You may have to watch this part of the video a couple of times. This top part right here is really just explaining that when we used words like below sea level, that we were really meaning negative numbers. Or when we, just like when we say that somebody withdrew from a bank account, that also meant a negative number. We talked about that a couple times, you know, like above sea level, positive number, below sea level, negative number, okay? And so they just wanted to like point that out to you and refresh your memory about that. And so here's the example problem that's in your book. They do give you step-by-step instructions for it here, but I want to try and explain it in my own words to see if that helps you a little bit. Like I said, it can be really tricky. It says a marine submersible, so in other words, a submarine, descends more than 40 feet below sea level. All right, so a submarine's going 40 feet below sea level, thinking that it's a negative 40, right, because it's below sea level. As it descends from sea level, the change in elevation is 5 feet per second. For how many seconds does it descend? Go ahead and read that one more time in your head to make sure that it makes sense to you. All right, one thing that you should be picking up from this is that it is descending more than 40 feet below sea level. So it's not just 40 feet, it's going further than 40 feet. So if this is sea level right here, this thing is down here at negative 40 feet, and it can also be below it. It can be anything more than that, right? And as it descends in sea level, I'm noticing that the change in elevation is negative 5 feet per second. So if it's negative 5 feet per second, that means the negative means it's going down, right? So every 1 second, I go down 5 feet. Go down another second, I'm now down 10 feet. Go down another second, I'm down 15 feet. And you could continue this, and you could logically do this problem, right? You can keep on going all the way down to 40, and you can determine a reasonable answer for this just by thinking logically. But we want to have an equation with this as well. We don't just want to do this type of work. We want to make sure that we can write this, not as an equation, as an inequality, I should say, okay? And so the first thing that you should do with this is write it as a statement, okay? This is saying how many seconds does it descend. That can be a little tricky to think of. So the book suggests, and I actually agree with it, is that you should rewrite this as a statement. What we're looking to do is we're looking to find the number of seconds that the sub descends below sea level. Okay? Below sea level. And so that will help us to think through all of this, okay? We want to find the number of seconds that the sub descends below sea level. Like I said, you could think it through. 5, 10, 15, 20. We know already, if you did that logical math, that we can get to this point in how many seconds? Yeah, it's going to be 8 seconds to get to the depth of negative 40 feet, right? And so, yes, we know the answer. It's going to be 8 seconds or more, because remember, it descends more than 40 feet below sea level. So we know the answer is 8 seconds or more, essentially, that it's going to be descending. But we now need to figure that out as an equation. So I wrote it out as a statement. And what I want you to be thinking of is that we need to know that our final elevation is going to be negative 40. So this is going to be our final elevation. Okay? And our other important part is that the final elevation is going to be greater than 40, or our final elevation, if we would write that out, it would be the number of seconds has to be we find 5 feet per second, so we don't know how many seconds it is. So let's do 5s. Do you agree that it's 5s would equal, or the number of seconds that you would have to go down, 5 feet per second, so we can write it that way, right? And whatever we multiplied these two by has to be greater than 40 feet below. Not even equal to, because it says more than 40 feet. So it takes me 8 seconds or more to get to 40 feet, but it actually says more than 40 feet. So I need like 40.0001 even, or something like that. You know what I mean? So it doesn't include 40. And so I have to have whatever these two multiplied together has to be greater than 40 feet below. But 40 feet below, this is where it can get tricky, actually means the same thing as negative 40. But if I change that to negative 40, I'm using a negative number in here. I multiplied this by a negative number. Does that make sense to you? In order to get it 40 below, I had a positive number multiplied by a negative. It actually has to be this. So I'm descending 5 feet and 5 feet per second. And so this equation turns into, if you think really carefully about it, negative 5 feet per second, because we're descending, okay? So this represents our descending. 5, every time we get a second, we don't know how many seconds it is, but we go 5 feet below. And whatever this turns out to be, we need it to be less than negative 40. Because the number has to be less than negative 40, because all these numbers down here are less than negative 40. Because they're further away from sea level, which is at 0. That is really, really confusing. But when you're dealing with a negative number in here, remember we had to flip the sign. And so that's what happened here. When we were dealing with the words 40 below, we were dealing with a positive number. But once we change it to think of it as negative 40, we had to change our sign. Once we thought of this as a positive number, and then we were realizing, oh, we're descending 5 feet per second, and we changed this to a negative number, we had to make sure that we flipped the sign in that way. So our actual equation is going to be, let me erase this now, to solve it, it is going to be negative 5s, or t, that's what they use in the book, is less than negative 40, because we're looking for all these numbers down here. We want to go to a deeper depth than 40 feet below, and so we could be at negative 41, negative 42, negative 45, all of those depths. You really have to think these types of problems through. So now let's solve the equation, okay? Let me erase some more space in here. You might have to rewatch that part of the video. Ask a friend if you don't fully understand it. That'll be helpful, okay? In order to isolate that s, I want to find out what s equals. I'm going to have to divide by negative 5, right? Both sides. And as soon as I divide by negative 5, since it's a negative number, don't forget, your biggest mistake is going to be to forget to flip it, and I need to flip my sign. So I'm going to do that in there first, right? And so now I'm left with s is greater than negative 40 divided by negative 5 is, positive 8. Okay? So s has to be greater than 8. If I'm going to graph this, then I've got 0 here, let's do 4 here, 8 here, let's do 12 here. Let's see where it is. If s is greater than 8, open circle, closed circle, you got it, it's open. If s has to be greater than 8, it's going in this direction, so let's try it out. Let's say that s equals 10, and we're going to do our check step. Negative 5 times 10, is it less than or equal to, or I'm sorry, is it less, no, equal to, it wasn't there. Is it less than negative 40? Multiply this, negative 50 is less than negative 40 because it's further away from 0, and so this is correct. So if I go a minimum of 8 seconds, or I have to go more than 8 seconds, if I go 10 seconds, I'll get further down there. Okay? Rewatch that part of the video or ask a friend if you don't understand. Here's a second example from your book. I want you to try and tackle this problem on your own before you watch me explain it. Go ahead and read the problem, try it, and then listen to my steps. All right, here I go. Every month, $35 is withdrawn from Tony's savings account to pay for his gym membership. He has enough savings to withdraw no more than $315. For how many months can Tony pay for his gym membership? You can easily think this through by just carefully saying, okay, 1 month is $35, 2 months is going to be $70, and keep on going, right? But we need an equation for this. Part of our module for this is to write an equation first. You will have to do that for your test, and it's really important to think that way. So reading it through one more time, I'm realizing that the important information that I might want to write into what did I call it before? Write it as a statement instead of a question, is saying I'm looking to find the number of months that Tony can pay, Tony can pay for his gym membership, right? Can pay for gym membership. I'm just going to put for gym. Okay? All right. And one thing I'm noticing is that $35, I don't know how many months it is, so I'm going to say that M equals the number of months that Tony can pay, right, for the membership. Okay, so I'm going to explain my variable, and now let's talk through what this is. I know that 35M is going to be the number of months that he can join, and I know that after reading this that he can do no more than $315. So I know that whatever this comes out to, 35M, has to be smaller than the $315 that Tony has, or equal to, because we are allowed to go up to the $315 because it says no more than. Okay, so that has to be the maximum number. That has to be the bigger than whatever this multiplies out to be. If not, he goes over. But when you're thinking of writing this as an equation the way that it says, like, this is kind of the equation that we can think of when we're thinking of positive numbers. However, this says $35 is withdrawn from Tony's account. And so that actually means negative $35 per month is taken from Tony's account. And right here, it says that we can draw no more than $315. And if he withdraws $315, that would be a negative $315. So because we're changing both of these to negative numbers to set up the equation properly to represent what's happening up here in the question, then it's kind of like we multiplied both of these sides by a -1. And if we're multiplying both of these sides by a -1, we know that we have to flip this. And so we are going to change it to negative 35M is greater than or equal to negative 315. Then I can divide both sides by negative 35, and over here, divide by negative 35. But as soon as we do that, this gets tricky. Because we did a division by a negative, we have to flip it again. So it looks like this again, kind of, sort of, right? So M, flip it, because I'm dividing by a negative, is less than or equal to, if I do this division, negative divided by negative is a positive, and this would equal 9. So he can pay for no more than 9 months of his gym membership. So maximum, because means greater, less, the months has to be less than or equal to 9 months. He can work it out.